I'd fire everyone today. I'd fire him today. Part of me
felt
wants
like Peterson made the announcement himself with his press conference.
Yeah.
It's just the tone of voice and the things he said.
Part of me wants him to sit and finish the year because they're making money by getting fired, and I don't like that either. But anyway, but what a terrible performance yesterday.
Worst in franchise history, Tone.
Yeah,
across the board.
Yeah. I mean, it's. I'm not even sure what you say.
Yeah, it's like not even worth revisiting the game. The game is like just into the nether regions of nothingness. It doesn't have an impact on anything. You may as well just.
Well,
I mean, there's nothing to take out of it. Okay.
Here, I think it impacts me from the standpoint of that's not how you show up.
Right.
I mean, Detroit's a very good football team.
Sure.
There's no doubt about it. And yes, we were without our starting quarterback. No doubt about it. But you had all 11 starters on defense.
Yeah.
And most on offense.
Yeah.
Missing one guy, Christian Kirk.
Well, you missed Tank Bigsby. That's a big loss. And you missed Trevor Lawrence. So you missed 3 guys, but fine. Everyone has injuries. My goodness, they were missing their tight end.
Right.
Didn't slow them down. And so, I mean, yeah, it was my frustration with that yesterday is it didn't feel like being there, and it didn't, to the eye test of watching it, seemed like there was much fight.
Right.
And I get it. Certain teams are better than others. Certain teams have great days and you have bad days. All that. But in the NFL, you're not supposed to give up 7 straight drives with 7 straight touchdowns where it's really not hard. I mean, at one point, I think it was 28-3, and they'd had only converted 3 third downs because they only had 4 third downs that they ran.
Right.
Or something like that, something ridiculous. And so that's, and so I think this is this is those moments, and this is a year where a lot of people came into this season with high expectations, and we heard a lot of talk about the talent of this team and what they could do, and I think a lot of people felt really good about, the opportunity that the team had.
Yeah.
And at 2-9, I mean, you could argue it's the most disappointing season in the history of the franchise.
No question.
Based on the investment the owner made. Shad made a huge investment this offseason. I mean, he's given every resource that you could ask for to a team.
That they did ask for. He gave them it all.
Everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to show up like that on a Sunday in November.
Yeah.
By the way, in a market where Shad has some peers, right? He's got that's a bad place to lose for Shad Khan, Tony. It's Detroit. That's where the bumper business is. It's his area. It was especially embarrassing for him yesterday. I promise you.
Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask Shad that.
Yeah,
but
that's fair.
My guess is that game could be on.
When will that
the
be?
moon.
Like January 28th? We'll have that opportunity, or
that game could be played on the moon. It would be embarrassing. I mean, it doesn't matter where it happens in the NFL. I mean, everyone knows about it. Everyone sees it.
No hide.
And that's the frustrating part is, I mean, you just sit back and you watch that. And losing, there's no shame in losing if you go out and give great effort and you go fly around and you play your tail off. And sometimes you're just, the other team has it going, like I said. They have more talent. They're in a role, whatever. They're playing better. That happens in all sports. But here's the thing that I don't have much tolerance for, is you got to compete.
Mm-hmm.
You have one job. You get paid to play the most beautiful game ever created. And you have an opportunity. Every guy dreamed of doing that growing up. I know I did. And you have an opportunity. You only have 17 of them a year. And you don't know how many you're going to have in your career. Trust me, it can end really quick.
Mm-hmm.
And just not to compete. And that's the frustrating part.
Tony, is there too much motivation by the scoreboard? Like, I think listen, the stats aren't incredibly different from allowing 12 last week, but you kept getting lucky or a turnover here or there. But the Vikings control the ball, they control the play, they control the play clock, everything but the points.
But I think that was actually, Jeff. I disagree. I thought yesterday was much different than any game. I mean, Buffalo was the closest on Monday night.
99 points in those two games.
I guess what I'm saying, though, is because of the points, Tone.
Well, it's the points. I mean, this is the biggest yard differential since 1979.
That's so
they had
embarrassing.
645 yards of offense, and their starters didn't play in the fourth quarter.
I thought we would have been challenged to beat Hendon Hooker and Vaki. I thought Hendon Hooker and Vaki were moving the ball against us fairly well. Tony, it's full circle in a way for you, and thinking about it, 30 years ago we were up there and we were part of that 44-0 game, and this was worse. They were taking knees with 5 minutes to go. I know you've relived that a few times with Wayne Fonts and stuff. I mean, this was just, I mean, like, I don't know what they're supposed to say, but And listen, I'm all for getting. You can't keep any. The coaches should go. But the players have to have some accountability too, right? I mean, they got to have some accountability for, like you said, it's the way they performed. I mean, it's just it has to be unacceptable, man. And to sit there and say we need a break, and I know what are you going to say, but gosh, we need a break.
Yeah, I mean,
the fans need a break. Yeah, I mean, holy cow.
After a game like that, you can't.
There's not much to say.
The comments that are made, what are they supposed to say?
Yeah.
You're embarrassed. You're not happy. I mean, I mean, the sense I get, and I've got this sense for a number of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels like we're lost.
Yes.
We're out in the wilderness.
They seem dead in the locker room, just listening to doing the post game show and listening to everybody talk.
Well, that's because the Lions killed them.
Yeah, they seem dead. They seem dead.
Well, but I think, to me, it's been going on. This is just. I mean, when you lose like this, this is kind of indication of bigger issues.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you're 2-9,
yeah,
and the investments that were made, we talked about, and the expectations, when you fall so far below.
I mean, there's little Tony underlying, things like, again, and we've brought this up before, but again, the 48th pick in the draft, he's up, but we don't know if we're going to be able to get him in. Why? You telling me he's not as good as the guys that are playing that, with all due respect, stink? I mean, it makes no sense at all. The way they move the chess pieces, what they do, who they sold us as being good. None of them are any good, Tone. The only thing we've learned is that maybe Trevor's better than we thought, and maybe he's been keeping this ship somewhat together because,
or at least
the backup quarterback play is abysmal.
Or at least taking too much heat for what's been wrong.
Or whatever it may be. I don't know, but my gosh, dude.
Well, I mean, I think in situations in a season like this, and then it's just highlighted in yesterday's game, I mean, you got to evaluate everything. I mean, you got to just step back and evaluate the whole thing. And I'm not going to, I'm not going to speak to,
I know.
I have a hard time because, as when we talk about things and I hear people on the radio, and this is the job of you guys, and this is the job of the media and fans, I get it. But, talking about guys getting fired and so on. So it's hard for me because, listen, there's consequences.
Sure.
And we're all being judged, and it's a high-performing business, and the outcome matters.
Right. Results oriented.
Judged by wins.
Results oriented.
I don't like speaking to.
Of course, I get it.
There's one person who's going to make that decision.
I get it. That's fair.
And that's Shad Khan.
It becomes inevitable for us. We try and take that same tack too, Tony, for a long time, right?
And I get that.
Longer than the fans. No, I get it. I didn't take it as a criticism, but it's a fair point because people.
I hate it for the organization because where we are.
Right.
And I love that place.
I know you do.
And it pains me, and it was like it was awful yesterday. It was absolutely awful.
Yes.
Sitting there watching that and talking about the team I love and care about.
Mm-hmm.
And I just hate it for the guys. There's a part of me that hates it for every guy in that locker room and every coach and everyone in the front office because they have families and this is their livelihood and everything else. But at the same time, you got to step back and you got to look at the whole thing and say, okay, how did we get here?
Yeah.
Like, what went off the rails?
Yeah.
And what is the underlying issue? Because I think you like everyone in this business and probably in life wants the quick fix.
Mm-hmm.
And they want, like, what's the magic thing that we need to do that if we just do this, everything's going to be okay.
Well, tell me one thing that you think how we got here, because nobody saw this coming. Nobody saw 2-9 and the worst team in the NFL. Jaguars have the worst record in the NFL. They're the number 1 pick in the draft with 6 games to go. And we can sit here all we want and say, we're not going to. We might. We damn sure might. So tell me, Tony, you tell me.
Interesting question.
Give me a couple things in your mind that you're like, and I'm not saying necessarily one particular move, but why is this team so bad?
Dan, I'm not going to answer it directly because I think I want to sit back and reflect and think about it.
I mean, I can tell you it's a combination of everything. I get that.
Right. It's not one thing. I mean, but I think, if you go back.
But you were saying, how do we sit here and reflect? How did we get here? And I'm sure we've all done that.
I think you got to go back to, you look at last year. I mean, we lost 6 or 7.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of thought that was due to injuries, and I'm sure injuries had something to do with that.
Right.
But you went in, and you felt, I think everyone felt like we were closer than maybe we were. And I think you got to look at, the decisions that were made and guys that were brought in and, how we structured it and just the overall process that we went through in evaluating where we were and try to learn from it.
Yeah.
Because the reality is it's not good enough and it's not okay.
Right.
And we should not be in this situation right now because, and I go back to Shad. I mean, Shad is going to make the decision, and it's his right to make whatever decision he makes. It's the team he invested in. And one thing I will say about Shad Khan, and always will, to me, if I go back when playing for an organization, Shad is the owner you want. Mm-hmm. Because he gives you all the tools you need to be good, and he's not afraid to invest in the facilities and in the team. I mean, this is not a situation where we have an owner who's skimping and not
right.
You can't question his desire to win.
Okay,
and that's what I get bothered when I hear people say, "Oh, it's Shad or this or But as an owner, the investment is there. So then you have to step back and say, okay, we have an owner who's willing to invest and give the organization all the tools that are needed to have success.
He just needs better people in place. Look, if I answer that question that Hick can ask, and it's a more delicate question for you than it is us, but Hick, here's what I think it is. The number one thing that's happened in the last 3 years. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a 4th-round draft pick. Yeah. We've got no stardom at all from rounds 2 through 7.
Yeah.
With nothing. And we may even get a 3-game blip of somebody, but I mean true developing core stars. The only ones we have are 1st-round picks. Yeah. Look at who they paid.
Yeah.
And so to me, you can't year after year use 25 draft picks from rounds 2 to 7 and not get 3 or 4 impactful players. They've gotten, I could argue, none. Yeah. And in an effort to prove you've made the right picks, you stew in your own mediocrity with names like Cisco or pick one.
Yeah, but you can say that. But when I say it's a combination of things, then I go look at our free agency haul where we brought in these guys from quote winning programs because they're going to show us how to win. And really, outside of Mitch Morse, we haven't gotten much from any of those guys this year.
If you're not developing that young core, though, where you're just piecemealing in, and that's not your what defines your success, we're left with a position because of no emerging young talent that these free agent pieces have to define what we are, and that's risky rolling the dice on old guys. Anyway, Tony, just too old rambling.
It's a combination because I think Jeff, your point is really a strong one in the sense that you have to develop guys. And this is a league with a salary cap. And so you have to draft young players and develop them if you're going to have success. But also you got to, free agency is important, and you can plug in a guy here or there to make a difference. You need to do both. And I'll go look at the Detroit Lions because a lot's been made about that. And I know, having Mark up there and talking to him about how they do things and what they do. But I won't even forget me knowing Mark, because I'll set aside everything Mark's told me.
Okay.
But looking at how they do, I think it starts with identifying of who you want to be and what is like the culture and what's your identity, and then you build towards that. And I'll never forget when Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell got hired.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone made fun of Dan Campbell. He's a meathead.
Tony, let me take that because I want you to keep going with that. But I want to tell you that in 2021, 7 NFL coaches were hired, right? The only 2 who are left were 2 who everybody made fun of, Sirianni and Campbell. Now, they're still making fun of Sirianni, but those 2 may meet in the NFC Championship game. They didn't, quote, win their press conferences, right? So it is amazing that those are the 2 who are left. Meanwhile, we had hired Urban that year, but we can go on and on. But continue your thought about Detroit.
And so they brought and everyone made fun of them. But I remember watching, and I'm probably biased because I do think guys who played the game have a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And Dan Campbell is who he is. He's a hard-nosed, tough-minded individual who believes the game of football is supposed to be played a certain way, and that's with big, tough people. And you play physical. And what they do, they went invested in those areas. They invested in the offensive line. Penei Sewell was their first pick. They invested in the run game. Everyone laughed, why are you taking Jahmyr Gibbs, especially ahead of Bijan Robinson, and back that early? Because they had made a decision that this is who we're going to be. We're going to run the ball. Everyone talks about Ben Johnson. He's a great play caller. Great play caller.
Mm-hmm.
But it is built on running the ball and play action pass. And so they built and got guys who fit who they wanted to be, tough-minded individuals. You talk about Ross St. Brown.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the toughest dudes on the field.
Yeah.
He had that coming out of USC, tough, physical-minded. Maybe a little undersized, maybe doesn't run 4.3, but he fits what we want to do and who we want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a conviction of what our identity is going to be and how we're going to play the game, and then you build it that way. And Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, and then you had Chris Spielman involved in whatever role he had. I mean, so they made a decision. This is who we're going to be, and we're going to build this way. And they started the season 0-10.
Yeah.
And I think if you go back and look at this, one of the things that I remember, because I thought when Dan Campbell hired Anthony Lynn as his offensive coordinator, a guy who had not really called plays before, I thought that was interesting. And it ended up being a mistake. You know what Dan Campbell did 8-9 games into the season?
Changed
as a first-year head coach who just got paid a bunch of money to rebuild it, he fired his offensive coordinator and said, I made a mistake, I'm moving on.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't sit there and wallow in it, didn't make excuses. He owned it, and said, we're going to move on, and he promoted Ben Johnson, who was on his staff as a tight end coach. Now,
been a pretty good move.
Did he get lucky? Or whatever? It doesn't matter. He knew he made a mistake, and he said, okay, this is what we're going to be. And I think if you look at that, and I can go across the league of successful people who have had success and how they do it. Jim Harbaugh is another great example. Everyone laughed. He said, I'm going to draft skill players,
mm-hmm.
offensive linemen. They're the most important. He went in there and changed the culture of the Los Angeles Chargers. So
Tony, let me ask you a question before we run out of time. We've already kept you a bunch here. Look. Most.
And so I'm not. But let me finish real quick.
Yeah, sorry.
And this is me less making a comment about our organization and what we've done or not done. But I think that's the look you have to take. You have to step back and look at the entire operation.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're 2-9 and you struggle season after season, we've struggled the last 2. We made a great run in 22 at the end, but we struggled the first half of that season.
Listen.
And so I think you have to step back and look at the entire thing and evaluate every single thing, and then make that determination. This is who we're going to be. This is how we're going to play. This is how we're going to, and you bring the people in to fit who you are and what you're going to be.
And I will say this, for whatever changes coming, and it appears inevitable that major changes are coming, and let's just, for argument's sake, focus on the coaching part. Look, most blow-ups, most teams that have a top 5 pick have god-awful quarterback situations. Jim Harbaugh didn't have that. Despite the Chargers going dormant for a year, he didn't have that with Justin Herbert. Whatever direction this franchise goes, whoever takes over this team is going to have the benefit of a much more proven, productive quarterback than most have in that situation. Is that fair?
Listen, I'm a big believer. I'm still a believer in Trevor Lawrence. And I think Trevor Lawrence, I've said it, and I'm not going to, I'm still in the boat of, and I still have a strong conviction that Trevor Lawrence, you can win a Super Bowl with Trevor Lawrence. He's a talented young player. Now, did he play great this year when he was in there? Not all the time. But, he's your quarterback. He's your friend. You made that investment. And I think he is good enough and talented enough and has the right makeup to be a guy who can help lead this organization to where it wants to get. And so, absolutely, Jeff, you have to step back and say, okay, he's our quarterback. So let's make sure we understand what does he do great, who he is, and let's build around that because that is, at the end of the day, he's your franchise quarterback. And I think whatever happens, and I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe everyone's coming back next year and there's changes on the staff. I have no idea. But the bottom line is whoever's here, if it's Doug and Trent, if it's somebody else, if it's the man on the moon, you got to step back and start at the very foundation of, what is our identity? How do we want to play football? What is the culture? All those things and say, okay, we're going to build it this way. And a big part of that, you have to think about your quarterback. And I think it starts now because Trevor Lawrence, I don't know the severity of it, but he has a shoulder injury. Does he need surgery or not? I don't know. I've heard everything in the media. Everyone says everything. I have no idea. But the bottom line is you got to start thinking about that right now. How do we handle the last 6 games with Trevor Lawrence? The last 6 games with Trevor Lawrence. Because you better be ready to go into that next offseason. And you got to have whether it's Doug and Trent or whoever, the mentality is we got to, okay, let's get to the foundation. We got to think about, what are we building here, and how are we going to do this, and how do we want to play football in the years to come?